Hello everyone, I am TST's the Mudman, and in just a few hours, this week's Gods Unchained weekend ranked event is going to start, so we have got to figure out what we are going to play. This week's video is going to be a little different than previous weeks, because the website that we get all of our information from, gudex.com, is not fully functioning at the moment, so I can't search decks as easily as normal. So we're not going to be going over every single god this week, just some standout decks. But if we talk about an archetype that, or if we don't talk about an archetype that you want to hear about, check out last week's video, because there have been no balance patches and no new archetypes discovered in the past week, so everything from last week's video is just as relevant now as it was then. So if you want to hear about board wipe death, for example, we're not going to talk about that this week, but you can check out last week's video for that. So now let's jump into everything. Let's start off by looking at the general meta. So we've got it set right now to past 7 days at Mythic, Gods by popularity, and no surprise, Nature at 30%, War at 25%, and then the rest of the gods floating around 10% of the meta. That's how everything's been for the past couple of weeks. So when you're deciding what deck you want to play, remember that you will be seeing a lot of Nature and War opponents. So let's jump into the first standout deck for this week. Alright, the first deck I want to talk about is J-Rock's Tempo Spell Magic deck. We've been talking about Tempo Spell Magic every week for the past couple of weeks. It's been good, but this deck in particular has some crazy stats. The creator himself, J-Rock, has played 119 games and has a 90.8% win rate, which is a great win rate over like a pretty large sample size. And the world at large has played 200 games with a 78.5% win rate. So this deck definitely wins. And let's go over why exactly it's so great. Well, it's got all the great early game stuff that we know and love from Tempo Magic. You got your Assistant Alchemist, which is great for pairing with Shadow Scryers on turn 1, so you can play 2 creatures without using a pip. It's also really great for making your Street Conjurer cost 0, so you can have big spell boost turns and play a whole bunch of stuff. Or maybe just make one of your strong 1-mana spells like Form of Power or Ancient Text cost 0, so you can pair it with your Miraculous Familiar or your Voltmir or Oni for like a big power turn on turn 3. And let's see, we've got a Demetrios in here, as well as Palace's Wand for some card draw. He's also got 2 copies of All-Seeing Spire, which was buffed relatively recently. This card is really powerful now. Its effect is, at the start of your turn, you foresee 1. At the end of your turn, you draw a card. So no matter what, you're guaranteed to draw at least 1 card. Order makes it relatively hard to remove, especially for War, which we saw earlier is 25% of the meta. So you need to remove this card with a spell or with a god power over 2 turns, but usually with a spell. So if your opponent wastes a spell on this, 0/2 that's not really hurting them, they're going to have a much harder time getting rid of one of the high impact cards like Miraculous Familiar or Oni Spell Sword or Monolith of the Storms. So, either you're going to draw a ton of cards or you're going to keep your strong stuff alive. So super great card in general. It's also a structure, so it pairs with Defend the Ramparts, which is just a super solid, control-y card right up there with Star Shard Bolts and Tracking Bolts. One really interesting part about this deck is it has both Palace's Wand and Scepter of Artistry, which at first I thought was a little strange, but I guess it makes sense, right? Because usually you want to play Palace's Wand in the early game so you can cycle through your deck since you have a low curve. But this deck has so much card draw, like we just said, Demetrios, Voltmir, the All-Seeing Spires, obviously. You don't really have a hard time generating spells. Even Miraculous Familiar generates you spells. So you're probably pretty okay with destroying your Palace's Wand, in order to play your Scepter of Artistry to set up, a big, final turn kill. Or the other way around, maybe you play your Scepter of Artistry, you use it all up, and then you Palace's Wand. Either way, I don't think the double relics are going to get in your way very much. Another important thing of note is this deck does have a copy of Oni Spellsword. A lot of these Tempo Magic decks have been dropping Oni recently, and this deck does only have 1 copy. It's not 2. But Oni is just super strong. It's another must-kill creature. So it's similar to the All-Seeing Spire. Your opponent has to kill the Spire. It has to kill the Familiar. It has to kill the Oni. They have to kill the Monolith. You're forcing them to answer so many things. Eventually, one of them is going to stick, and all of them are good enough to win the game on their own. Then you got your classic stuff, got your Worm Breast, your Epiphanies to end the game, and he's also got a copy of Iron Tooth Goblin, which is super good in the meta right now. Pretty much every god is running relics. Magic obviously has the Palace's Wand and the Scepter of Artistry. Most Magic decks run at least one of those. Control Death has Kopesh. Zombie Death has Necroscepter. Light has all the 1-mana relics and sometimes the 3-mana relics. Nature has Jagstaffs and the 2-mana relics. You get the picture. Pretty much every single god runs relics. So Iron Tooth Goblin is really nice in the meta right now, and this deck is just super strong. Crazy win rate over like a ton of games. If you like playing Magic, then I definitely recommend this list. This deck is definitely super strong. Now we are moving on to Zoolight. This list was made by Phenor White. Zoolight has been really good in the meta for the past couple of weeks. They are just really, really good at controlling the early board state. They've got these great 1-mana relics for lots of great early game trades. Their god power generates 2/2 creatures. They also have skeleton heavies and pyramid wardens, as well as trial spirits, to make creatures early and buff up their health so they can sustain them. And Light's general plan is play creatures, buff creatures, win the game. So you can also control the board with Light's Levy. I forgot to mention that. Light's Levy, obvious, super strong card. But you fill your board up with decent creatures. You buff them all up with Radiant Dawn. You buff them up again with Canonize, and then again with Asterius, or both, and you crush your opponent. One thing I like about this list in particular is it has 2 Iron Tooth Goblins, just like in the Magic deck we discussed. Iron Tooth Goblin's super good in the meta right now. Every god has relics, and since Light has these great AoE buffs like Radiant Dawn and Asterius, literally any creature is a threat when you're playing Light. So the 2 Iron Tooth Goblins are great. Also, most relics tend to control early board states, right? Like, All of War's cheap relic can remove your, 2/2 acolytes. Your zombie death opponents, Necroscepter makes a bunch of zombies that keep contesting the board state. And Light players really want to win the early board states so they can get all their big buffs. And Iron Tooth Goblin will definitely help with that, and maybe he can even catch a buff. So Zoolight's been great for the past couple of weeks. I think it's going to remain great this coming weekend, and this is a super solid list. Really clean curve, creatures, all over the place, no questionable, strange 6-mana creatures. This is just a super solid Light deck. This will definitely get you lots of wins over the weekend. Okay, next up is War. I've got 2 War decks to show you today. One a little aggressive-y, the other one a little control-y. We're going to start off with the aggressive one. This list was made by Clutch. I am a big fan of the play creatures, then buff creatures archetypes, and this deck plays creatures and buffs creatures for sure. If you look over here at the curve, if you take the Enduring Shields out, there are 17 creatures that cost 3 or less mana, so you can fill up the board really early to start buffing your stuff up. And if you've played Gods Unchained for a while, then you know that creatures with Protected are really great in these types of archetypes because protected creatures are hard to destroy, and that means you can buff them up. And you can see we've got 2 Master Tacticians, 1 Adi, and then 2 Raid Revelers. So you got lots of early game protected creatures that are just great buff candidates. You've also got 2 copies of the Enduring Shield, so you can protect up either your Warmonger Smiths, your Valkyr's Captains, your Pyramid Wardens, or your Netherborn Binders, so they can be great buff targets. Let's go over the buff cards real quick. We've got 2 copies of Another Round, 2 copies of Red Fume Serum, and 2 copies of Soul Survivor. All the big creature buff cards are packed into this deck. And then we've also just got great, board control creatures. All the great blitz creatures. Of course, we got the Orcish Elite in here, 5 mana, 3/6. Super good for controlling the board. This thing usually kills 2 creatures or like 1 really important creature. Your opponent plays a Pyramid Warden trying to slow you down, and you completely topple over it with your Orcish Elite. Your Archangel Bruisers, which are obviously great for controlling the board, also good for killing hidden stuff like cats or even ordered creatures. Obviously you got your Tavern Brawlers and stuff like that. This is just a pretty and of course you got the Anus. This one's not in all war decks, but he's super strong, especially when buffed. If this guy can get protected infinitely every single turn, giving him more attack is pretty powerful. But then, besides that, just a pretty standard Slayer War deck. Win the early board, have a strong creature presence, hit the God Power button to chip away at them, use your relics, which you don't have a ton of, only Enduring Shield and Valka's Captain, but, nevertheless, use your relics to trade away your opponent's board and just overwhelm them with tempo. This deck looks super strong, super fun. If you like the tempo war decks, this one is definitely a good one to try. And next up, we've got the more control-y war list. This one was made by Jackin. This deck uses the Valka's Presence God Power, and it's similar to the last one, but you can see it's got way more juice up in the top end. Still some of the strong buff cards. Got the Red Fume Serum, got the Soul Survivor. You've got lots of Healy stuff and board clears. You got the Leviathan Hunter combo with Carnage Sweep, as well as Magic Missile Launcher Carnage Sweep for big, huge board clears, and some healing with Magic Missile Launcher. You've got the Grand Hall, which is a super strong Divine Order card. Frontline for your opponent to deal with, and it increases all your creatures' strength and gives them leech, so you can just take a bunch of damage, heal all the way back up. Control decks love doing that type of thing. Obviously you have your two demos in here because it's a control deck, that's the rules. But demo pairs particularly nicely with your Hector. This deck has all the keywords in it. Orcish Elite for Twin Strike, Protected, with your Master Tactician, even Leech with Demogorgon, Protected. I mentioned Protected, yeah. So the bottom line is you play Hector, it has all the keywords, it's completely broken, it destroys 2 of your opponent's creatures, it has frontline, so it can't be ignored. You heal for like 12. Card's completely busted. Herdicus is in here, super strong card, just great for a free clear / big body the turn you play him. And yeah, this is super similar to all the other control-y war archetypes that we've talked about in the past, but this one just seems super strong. Great board clears, lots of health and health sustain. Out of Its Misery is always a cool one for these decks since they run Valka's Presence. Out of Its Misery is never dead, so if you top deck in the late game for 3 mana, you can just draw one of your creatures in your deck with the big buff, and most of your creatures have Blitz or something like that, so they're always high impact. So just a super solid card. And if you like slowy, control-y war, if you love playing demos, then this deck is definitely for you. Alright, and last up we have the most popular god in Nature. This mid-range Nature deck was made by Hypnotape, and the first thing you might notice is this deck is a cool 0.0420 ETH. So, it's not free, but it's considerably cheaper than most of the other decks we talk about in these videos. And a lot of these cards are core cards, which you could earn for free, so it's theoretically even cheaper. And this deck is just good. Nature is the most popular god, because they're just super decent all throughout the game. If you look at this deck's curve, you can see it's got great creatures, lots of early game stuff, so you can guarantee a strong early game board presence, right into the late game with lots of 5 and 6 mana creatures, for when you get to those later rounds. Let's go through the deck a little bit. Got some strong creatures. Got your Wild Hogs, your Skeleton Heavies, Marsh Walkers, and Black Jags for your creature presence in the early game, as well as your low-hanging fruits, which are just super strong cards in the meta right now. It's like a combination of Athenian Archer and Shield Bearer, and buffing your Marsh Walkers, Jaguars, or Skeleton Heavies, just super strong. Also got your Athenian Fruit Bearer plus Faeflame Blade combo. Faeflame Blade is just good, in general. It's particularly good against magic, destroying Shadow Scryers. But it's also great at guaranteeing you can proc the Frenzy for Finian Fruit Bearer. And Finian Fruit Bearer is, he's just nuts. 2 mana creature with, if you count his Vibrant Fruit as stats, he's a 3/4 for 2 mana that grows every single turn. The Vibrant Fruits effects buff creatures. He's just, he's super nuts. It's not hard to have him, guarantee get a fruit the turn you play him on turn 2, and, even 1 fruit is often good enough to win the game. Next up, we got the Celestial Stag, which, like Finian Fruit Bearer, is just a super strong must-kill creature. Blessed effects are always strong in the early game, because, when you're a tempo deck, you want to be the person controlling the Sanctum. And, whenever you play a creature, you get a random nature card, and since you have a fairly low curve, you want to have strong tempo plays. You want to play all your mana, spend all your mana, play all your cards. Generating more resources is really, really strong. And you got your lightning strikes and canopy barrages for your spell removal. Rabid Bear is super strong, 3 mana 4/4. It's crazy on its own, and then worst case scenario, you don't activate the Frenzy, in which case it's just a Hunt Warden, and Hunt Warden's good. This deck has Nefarious Briar and Svart Basilisk, and like we've been talking about this video, relics are really good right now. So relic removal is strong, and nature has access to Nefarious Briar, which is some of the better relic removal in the entire game. Then move into the mid game with your big creatures, Overgrown Rhino, Brazen Moose, one of those aforementioned strong relics in Jagstaff, and then your 6 mana cards, which are your real heavy hitters. Giant Pangolin has been super popular, and it's really strong, great immediate impact with its Blitz effect. Armor makes it hard to remove, and 6 attack kills your opponent really quickly. Then you have Sudden Bloom and the Hunt, which are both effectively board clears. The Hunt clears any board regardless of your board state. And if you have any creature on the board with 6 mana, Sudden Bloom becomes nuts. You buff something up to gargantuan proportions, Giant Pangolin, Brazen Moose, maybe even something tiny like like a Marshwalker. But either way, it's going to have Twin Strike and Overkill and have at least 6 attack. So it's going to deal a ton of damage and clear your opponent's board. Just super strong. There's a reason why nature is the most popular god. It's super easy to just make a solid deck like this for fairly cheap. And this deck is good, it's strong, none of the cards are questionable. Whole deck, 30 cards, all good. If you like nature, this is definitely the list for you. Okay, so now it is conclusion time. We've thought about the meta, we've discussed a couple of decks. What should we play over the weekend? Well, in this video, we only talked about the standout decks, so honestly, any of the decks that we went over are, good weekend ranked choices. But in my opinion, J-Rock's Magic deck really stands out. I mean, this list is a work of art. It's just so good all the time. If you're the aggressor, you can play, your strong early game creatures, your Assistant Alchemist and your Shadow Scryers, as well as your Onis and Monolith of the Storms to apply tons of pressure. And if you're playing against like a Slayer War or an aggressive nature deck, then you have so many control tools. You got your 2 copies of both bolts to defend the ramparts. Obviously Wormbreasts don't have to go face, they can trade. You can control the board so well as create such a strong board presence or, threatening board state. The deck seems like, it's got a good game against everything. It can just do it all. This deck is particularly good in my opinion. But that being said, every single deck we went over can definitely perform well this weekend. And no matter what you go with, make sure you have fun. Tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!